Good afternoon to all. Welcome to day 2 of the 11th Creative Theory Colloquium. The panel on labor, law and technology aims to seek answers to the reality of the claim of technology supremacy over human labor. To continue, I would like to introduce our chair, Professor Arun Kumar, who is the Malcolm Chair Professor at the Institute of Social Sciences and was formerly a Professor of Economics at Jawaharlal Nehru University. We welcome you, sir. The speakers for this panel are Dr. Anirban Dasgupta, who is a professor and head at Human Sciences Research Center at IIT Hyderabad. Second, Mr. Vageesh Vishnoi, who is pursuing PhD in sociology from IIT Delhi. His interests lie on the intersection of labor studies, labor process theory, technology and work, and informal economy. Third, we have Dr. Shuchi Bharati, who has completed her PhD from Center for the Study of Law and Governance, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Panelists, please note you have 12 to 15 minutes each to present. Our discussant is Mr. Nitesh Das. Mr. Nitesh Das is from Amazon India Workers Association, which has played a historical role in raising issues concerning warehouse workers before management, the Labour Department, state government and central government. To begin, now I would like to invite our chair to take. Thank you.
So thank you very much for inviting me here to chair this session. It's indeed a privilege to do this because technology is a issue that we are all grappling with in present times. I'm reminded of what Arrow said, that technology creates the mist of the future. So the future is not clear, and therefore we turn short-termists. When we turn short-termists, then all long-term issues go to the background. This is something that's defining society, where now increasingly with marketization and with the growth of technology, we are taking a very short-term perspective on major problems of society. So that's one set of things that we have to grapple with. And in the context of labor, also it's very important because capital treats labor as homogeneous, which can shift, which can move around, but technology creates divide. Especially in a country like India, there is a huge technological divide that exists between the organized sector and the unorganized sector. The unorganized sector employs 94% of the workforce, organized sector employs only 6%. So that creates an enormous problem. There is lack of mobility from the unorganized to the organized sector, and as technological change has taken place, there is labor displacement that's taking place at a large level, including in agriculture. With increased use of tractors and harvester combines and threshers, now there is no labor absorption taking place in agriculture. There is in fact excess labor which needs to move out from there into other sectors. But other sectors are also so mechanized that they cannot absorb more labor. So there is a problem of unemployment, and unemployment has 4 categories. What we think of as unemployment is usually not unemployment alone. There is also underemployment. You define employment as if you have even 1 hour of work per week, you're employed, but clearly you're underemployed. So underemployment is there, and then there's disguised unemployment, and then there is people who've just left the labor force. They're not even looking for work. So these 4 categories of unemployment need to be looked at if we want to discuss labor. And technology has a very important role to play. 80% of all investment is going to the organized sector. And that's not generating jobs because of the use of technology. And only 5% investment is going to agriculture, which has 46% of the workforce. And that is inadequate to generate jobs there, to generate employment. So therefore you have a problem of unemployment at both the poles. Where the investment is going, there you don't have employment generation. Where the investment is short, there you don't have employment generations in agriculture. So labor is stuck. So this is a reality that has come as a result of the kind of technical change that's taking place in the world, which we have copied. So globalization, which is also a sort of struggle for technology. What shape globalization is taking in India is also very important. We need to look at the context of globalization because technologies are coming from outside. We are way behind in R&D in India. We spend 0.7% of GDP on R&D, whereas other major countries are spending 3% and 4% on R&D, and China's economy is 5 times ours, so therefore they're spending 20 times more on R&D, and they become the manufacturing hub of the world. So this manufacturing hub of the world is capturing, and impacting our economy, especially the small scale and the micro sector. They've got very badly affected because goods are coming in from China, displacing these industries. So the unorganized sector is being displaced by imports from China. It's being displaced by the fact that organized sector is rising very dramatically. So all this is happening given the kind of technology and the technological change that's taking place. Finally, I'd like to also flag the issue of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is creating a huge change, and it's very rapid. We were only talking about ChatGPT 4 2 years back in November 2022, and now we are talking about ChatGPT 5, which will be able to mimic the human brain much more closely. It can do self-correction. The errors of ChatGPT 4 are going to get corrected with the use of Strawberry. Just 2 days back in the Indian Express, they had mentioned this. The Strawberry used with the ChatGPT 5, incorporating it, would be able to do self-correction. So mimicking the human brain is going to be much more this thing. And as a result, we are not only going to displace semi-skilled jobs like call centers, BPOs, but even skilled jobs are likely to be displaced. Work of doctors, chartered accountants, lawyers, and things like that, teachers, that can be displaced. So while some people will do well in these technologies, others are going to suffer because they don't have access to those technologies, and large number of people in India don't have access to technology. So in other words, there are huge challenges that face us today in India, especially vis-a-vis given the huge unemployment we have, in addition with the use of artificial intelligence, the kind of additional problems that will come, and all that will have political implications. You're all political scientists. I'm a sort of outsider. But I can see that the political implications will be huge because the fight for reservation is going to only deepen. Reservation will not solve the issue of unemployment, but just those few jobs are important. So conflict in society will increase as a result of this growing unemployment. Everybody would be wanting to have more and more, of the pie. But how do you get that pie for that? And it is in this context that I think the morning session where we were discussing the kind of political implications, they will get aggravated. So the political implications of the kind that you probably have been discussing, those are likely to get aggravated, and therefore, we have to be very careful about it. So with these few words, I think we can start the session, and as is already announced, everybody gets 12 to 15 minutes so that we can try and finish a little in time. So I request...
Do I turn this on? Yeah. Thank you very much, Chair. And just to add to our numbers, I'm also one of the non-political scientists in the room, and I'm here to provide you with the mandatory dose of economics in pretty much any gathering. Well, I'll try to make it short, and I can't promise on being interesting, but short I will be. So my engagement in this presentation is part of a larger paper which I'm doing with one of my colleagues over at IIIT Hyderabad. If you mistake it for IIT Hyderabad in the Hyderabad airport, which has happened to me once, I landed up about 30 kilometers from my destination. So it's one eye can make a lot of difference. Well, yeah, that was my first time. And that's how I remember. So,
IIIT or IT?
IIIT, yes. Yes. Yeah. So, I will be talking about digital technology specifically in today's presentation, although some of the issues relate clearly to technology more generally. So we all know about the long history of sort of conflict or antagonism between technology and labor, going back easily to the Luddite movement in the early 1800s, way up in Lancashire, Manchester, etc., where machines which were supposed to automate part of the textile manufacturing process and therefore kill or take away jobs were actually destroyed by labor organizers or labor activists. And across the 20th century, these kind of conflicts have played out repeatedly. I mean, I'm just talking about two examples which are very well known in the automobile sector in the US, right from the birth of the UAW, the United Auto Workers, I think in the 1920s. But they became more and more active through the 30s, 40s, all the way into the 60s. And there have been major actions taken by activists or workers on behalf of the UAW trying to block automation. Much of it didn't come to fruition, but the attempt was clearly there. And back again in India, some of us who are old enough to remember the huge agitation in India against bank computerization starting from the middle of 1980s and continued well into the 1990s. Again, one can look at it as a sort of repeat of the same outcome that very often labor loses out. There might be pockets of victory, but in general, capital wins, and there are obvious reasons for that. Now, the current anxiety about job loss that we see all the time in a lot of public discourse and a lot of academic discourse also on digital automation, as Professor Kumar said, artificial intelligence, robotization, which has been going on for much longer, but the nature and I would say the scale of robotization has also changed using data and machine learning methods. So in an analytical sense, it's a continuation of this long historical pattern. Now, where I'm trying to come in, because there's not much really for me to add in terms of the global literature, which is, it's proliferating at a very, very high rate. Everybody wants to talk about future of work and what's going to happen to how many jobs will be lost, etc. So I really don't have much else to add to that. The thing that I want to do is to situate this debate specifically in the context of the Global South, because a lot of this debate is happening as the technology that we are talking about, even the discussion about the technology originates very often from the North, and then it seeps into our part of the world, and we kind of deal with similar questions. Which is not to say that there are no common concerns. But what I would like to highlight today is that there are some distinct concerns, or the nature of the concerns take a different shape, I would say, in the context of labor surplus economies like that of India. So I would like to talk about two things today specifically. One is the role of this new digital technology in the process of structural transformation and the interface between informality and this technology. These are, of course, related questions, not independent questions. Now, before I do that, I want to do a very, very, very quick detour into this debate about so-called appropriate technologies. And this is a debate which originated both inside development economics, but actually went beyond it. A lot of activist scholars in the early 70s got into this debate, as did more professional, sort of official development economists. The key issue was very simple, that we are importing in developing, or what was called the third world, importing technology which is inherently capital intensive and hence inappropriate for our kind of economic reality. And that accentuates a kind of dualism which already existed in our economies, both in production and employment, between a very small sort of enclave like modern economy and a large sort of primitive informal sector or sectors. Now, the idea or the sort of goal that some of the appropriate technology scholars had was to highlight and try to even develop, because some of them were also practitioners, including Schumacher has written quite a lot on what kind of technology will work. And the idea was to implement some sort of intermediate technology, which is making use of labor more intensively, but also being more productive than the typical informal sector, which partly was very, very low in productivity because it was full of surplus labor. But then this question of viability and competitiveness of what this technology will produce, who will buy this technology, if you produce using this technology, which is deviating from so-called the norms of profit maximization in some sense, will it have a future? Was the key sticking point. And that pretty much, in my reading, led to the gradual fizzling out of this entire debate, and by the early 1980s. A part of the reason is also early 1980s brings neoliberalism as we know it in its early version in a big way across the world, starting with the US and the UK. So these kind of ideas of trying to do or tamper with what market forces will make you do in terms of production were not taken very, not taken very seriously, and there was, in fact, I would say, active ways of sidelining such approaches. So the reason I'm bringing this up, this sort of old piece of debate, is that as late as 2021, 2022, there has been a revival of this debate coming from some of the most well-known mainstream economists working on development, including Danny Roderick from Harvard, Daron Acemoglu from MIT, particularly in the context of digitalization. They basically say that digital technology and not digital technology in itself, but the direction of change, the direction in which it is evolving, is absolutely inappropriate, pretty much for labor across the world. But this degree of inappropriateness actually multiplies several times when you look at economies where labor is surplus. And herein they make an attempt to bring back those earlier ideas about appropriate technology, saying that what is going on now is clearly very, very inappropriate. But where I think they're very good, as some of you might know, they're technically very proficient, very good with data analysis. So they demonstrate the inappropriateness, how it's increasing the inequality between labor and capital, how technology, the way it works, is making labor less, not just redundant in some cases, but even existing labor becoming less and less powerful vis-a-vis capital. But when it comes to how do we get to that point where technology can be made more appropriate, I think they are very tentative. And I would say the reason they are so tentative is because in mainstream economics, you don't talk about capitalism as much as not to even utter the name in most papers. The C word is something that should be left unsaid. People might say globalization, global system, global economy, but capitalism as a historically existing structure that has evolved and has, if not laws of its own, but sort of mechanisms of its own, is something that is very seldom acknowledged. And I think that is a big gap in this literature. But Yeah. I mean, I don't. Oh,
Time.
here it is. I know. So So I'll now just simply make my points. I have 3 more slides. I'll just go over there. So, what does digital transformation mean for a country like India? This is a country which has a huge pool of low productivity labor, where the process of so-called European style or North American style structural transformation has slowed down to the extent of, as some people have called, being stunted. So you have an agricultural sector, as the chair had said, producing barely 18% of total value, employing 45% of the workforce. Add to that huge informality across sectors. Now, in this context, what are we talking about when we talk about the digital economy? Again, estimates are scarce, but what I could put together is that the core digital economy as it stands, mostly ICT and allied activities, produce 8.5 to 9% of our GDP, but interestingly employs less than 1.5% of the total workforce. If you add the group of sort of gig workers or platform workers, particularly of the kind that we are aware of all the time, this will still, if you add that number, this will be maximum 3 to 4% of the total workforce. So, unlike the advanced economies, the fear of job losses due to automation and AI is only one of a larger set of concerns for a country like us. As Geeta Gopinath from the IMF recently said, since a majority of Indian workers are in labor-intensive agriculture, the impact of AI is going to be lower. She, in other cases, has said going to be minimal. This is what I could get hold of, where she says it's going to be lower. So, what we are actually seeing is not so much the jobs that are going to be lost. It's actually about the closing, the narrowing of the scope of future jobs that a country like India could hope for towards its, this sort of a destined goal of being an industrialized economy. It's closing that possibility even more. Are we done in terms of time? I'll take just 1 minute. So, informality is the default state of being for a country like ours. What digitization or digitalization, I should say, is doing, it's creating possibly, or it's in the way towards creating a new class of informal labor connected to the digital economy. So non-digital informal labor, many of them are being transformed into digital informal labor as we speak. What does it mean for the labor process, autonomy versus control, labor rights, and room for collectivization? And my main point, my final point is that while there is quite a lot of excitement about collectivizing gig workers, digital labor, and I have a colleague here who is going to discuss our papers, who's working on that. I'm absolutely fascinated and impressed by the energy that's there in organizing digital labor. But I think the strategy is not going to be any different from what we have had to deal with when the problems of organization, collectivization will remain pretty similar. That's what I would end with. Thank you.
Thank you. I think next we have Vageesh.
Yeah.
Can you just pass this one?
Okay. Yeah, so thank you, sir, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for being here and giving me this opportunity to present my work on emerging gig economy. So this paper is based on its finding on the ethnographic studies that I have undertaken as part of my ongoing PhD from IIT Delhi. So before embarking on the field, I had committed this original sin of having preconceived notions about nature of field and troubling realities of gig work. And as such, I had equipped myself with academic vocabulary and jargon endemic in the literature around platforms. So I was adequately punished for this when I came across the narratives of my interlocutors, which turned out to be counterintuitive in many ways. So one such analytical category which I deal with and which has become synonymous with employment relations of gig work is of course precarity. So this term garnered attention with Guy Standing's work, Precariat, the New Dangerous Class. So Standing defines precariat as, and I quote, one defining characteristics of the precariat is distinctive relations of productions, so-called flexible labor contracts, temporary jobs, labor as casuals, part-timers, or intermittently for labor brokers or employment agencies. But conditions of unstable labor are part of the definition, not the full picture. Quote ends. So even a cursory glance of Indian history in post-liberalization period can help in seeing these characteristics have been perennial features of informal economy in India. And these features include casual labor, expansion of contractualization, jobless growth, and stagnant wages. Standing's definition of precariat is predicated on existence of glorious past when welfare states of various flavors ruled the globe. In his thesis, there's a disintegration of work relationship embedded in these states, resulting in the birth of precariat. This argument has become rallying cry for the critiques of Standing. So, for instance, Ben Scully has pointed out that in the context of Global South, labor politics was always enmeshed in anti-precarity struggle, especially in colonial times when disenfranchisement of voting rights was order of the day. Similarly, Andrew Sanchez has also put precarity to the litmus test of history. However, he bases his claims in the experience of post-liberalization period and argues that precarity has been a pervasive and defining feature of employment in Indian labor market, irrespective of formal or informal nature. Others have also critiqued notions of precarity on different grounds. However, due to paucity of time, I am not discussing them here, and I have talked about them in the paper. So in this paper, I critically engage with the notion of precarity and uncover its limitation to understand work realities in Indian context. Further, I argue that work realities of platform-mediated gig work should be studied on its own terms rather than borrowing universal concepts which fail to capture the concrete realities of varying local contexts. As such, the paper offers to conceptualize aspects of temporal fix and flexible exploitation by analytically engaging with the evidence present in the paper. So this picture that you see it's of I did most of my fieldwork in and around PVR Anupam multiplex. Such sites are called hotspot by Zomato owing to the high quantity of orders emerging from here. These places serve as quasi workplace for the workers as they wait for the orders and cultivate their sociality here. Most of the workers that I met during the field work had a history of working in non-platform jobs in informal economy. While some found it difficult to find jobs, others were lured into gig work owing to abysmal working conditions at their workplaces and promise of better wages. One of the young workers, Roshan, who previously used to work as a cook in the food joint, shared experience about his previous occupation. He explained the reasons to call it quits from his previous workplace, and I quote, "I left because of some personal issues. The brother of the owner was drunkard. Right before my shift would get over, he would come and order me to prepare food for him. It was almost daily business. This was getting too much to handle, so I left the job." Quote ends. So as much as Roshan points out the work conditions at his previous workplace, his narrative also becomes a telling account of what Chris Smith calls plasticity of labor power. By plasticity, he meant while other commodities have single-use value, the labor power could be used in variable ways as per the immediate requirements of occupation and workplace. So here I argue that in the case of informal economy, which is marked by absence of clear and transparent contract between employers and employees, the labor power of the worker gets molded and used as per the whims of employers, irrespective of the requirements of the job. It also results in contestations between workers and employers, as clear from the case of Roshan. And in my paper, I have explored other narratives as well, which point out that these contestations often turned out to be in favor of the employers. So, and the other reason which I discuss here is related to temporal freedom which workers claim to experience in the gig work. So, the agency to decide whether to call it a day seems to shift from the bosses to the workers, mediated by the application of the platform. The digital application also captures the imageries of the workers who describe their decision in terms of clicks on the smartphones or the selfies. One of the most experienced workers at the hotspot, Atul Rana, who has been involved with platform for 5 years now, he had this to say. He puts it succinctly, and I quote, first and foremost, I like the काम करने का तरीका, the way work is conducted here. You don't have to listen to anyone. There is no issue if you have any emergency. You can switch off your ID and attend it. In other jobs, you have to talk to your boss, and then he says you can go tomorrow, there is work today. There are many headaches in the jobs. However, here, however much you work, you get to keep the entire amount. There the boss takes the cut. Here, however much you increase your login hours, your earning increase accordingly. The biggest benefit is that you get timely salary. We don't know who is the boss. Everything is online. We work properly and get the income accordingly. Quote ends. So, apart from the role of technology that Atul points out, he also points out there is a direct correspondence between wages and the working hours. Earnings are supposedly anchored in the number of hours one works for. It could be argued that gig work comes with greater elasticity of effort than traditional non-platform informal work arrangements. Greater efforts translate into higher wages with the element of certainty which is clear from Atul's account. However, narrative evidence only presents a partial picture of the story. Insofar, precarity is understood as abrupt discontinuity from the past. The perception of workers from about previous workplace presents counterintuitive evidence. The working hours and wages drawn from the previous workplace in comparison to gig work is compared in the next section in order to paint a more holistic picture about the limitations of precarity as a conceptual framework. So here you see this table. It's of 67 workers, and I had I had asked them how many number of hours did they work in the previous occupation vis-a-vis here in the platform, and what were the minimum and maximum number of hours that they worked there, and what were the wages drawn. And I have divided them into 3 groups: 15 to 20, 20 to 30, and 31 to 55 in terms of age. And in the given table, as you can observe, workers in all 3 groups have earned better in platform rather than their previous occupation in the same average hours. However, more than average hours, it is a maximum and minimum reported number of hours which tells rest of the story about the nature of work in respective workplaces. And it could be understood from in better light from this particular histogram. Here, the pink color represents the previous occupations, and purple color represents the working hours in platform. And here, as you can observe, workers in the platform work are dispersed across time slots, while in the previous occupations, most of them reported to have worked for 9 and 13 hours a day. From the ethnographic evidence discussed above, it could be argued that owing to the subjective predicaments of the workers, they found it constraining to work in previous occupations. And Yatendra was one of the workers whom I met at PVR Anupam, who worked for more than 15 hours a day on regular basis. When I inquired about the working hours of previous workplace and how often he had to work overtime in the previous occupation, Yatendra revealed to me in complaining tone about rarity of such occasions where he could stretch his workday and earn extra income by availing overtime benefits. As Yatendra solely relied on food delivery work as a primary income, so he worked for most part of the day to support his family. There were others who had more erratic schedules. One of the workers, Ajit at the hotspot, who would occasionally visit PVR Anupam, went on to inform me about his schedule, and I quote, although I primarily work as a delivery boy, but often it happens that I have to run errands for my family as well. We also own a grocery shop in Sangam Vihar, which occasionally demands my attention. However, even when I have few hours left in a day, I make sure to make money out of that by logging into Zomato account. Quote ends. Ajit and Yatendra's account point out a nominal flexibility inherent in gig work, which allows the worker to engage with platform anywhere between 2 hours to as high as 17 hours, as clear from the histogram. Division of the day into slivers of time or aliquot parts of 2 hours gigs could be understood using David Harvey's conceptualization of spatial fix. David Harvey defines capital as value in motion. It is one unending process of generating surplus value which compels capital to constantly move into and incorporate novel spaces into its circuit. The problem of accumulation is temporarily taken care of using the process of spatial fix. So here Harvey explains, and I quote, surpluses of capital and shortages of labor can be fixed either by movement of capital into areas of labor surpluses and or weak labor organizations, or importation of cheap labor, as in case of Europe, into centers of capitalist development. Quote ends. Thus, it could be argued that emergence of gig economy is an instance of spatial fix, where transnational finance capital invests in the platforms with the hope of profit generation. So in the context of India, the reserve army of labor and those locked in underpaid informal economy could be mobilized for the purpose of spatial fix. While in the countries like UK, the spatial fix is achieved by bringing in migrant workers from Brazil and South Asian countries as well. However, division of day into 2 hours gigs by the platform reveals another layer of the process. Allowing workers of flexibility to choose the number and time of the gigs results in incorporation of labor powers which are, number 1, either underpaid but without option of second job, or number 2, having free time which could not be devoted to non-platform work arrangements due to their temporal constraints. So it could be termed as temporal fix, defined as enroachment by capital of last remaining free hours of labor powers to subsequently incorporate them into its circuit. Capital, represented by gig platforms, innovates the temporal arrangement of the labor process to accommodate labor powers which remain outside the circuit of capital due to their subjective predicaments. Therefore, Yatendra and Ajit both could be co-workers alongside each other, while at the same time devoting incomparable labor hours for the platform. While it could be observed that it brings flexibility to the labor process of the platform, constantly emerging literature is now offering evidence to expose abysmal working conditions of gig economy. A more appropriate articulation could be to call it flexibility of exploitation under gig work. While workers are free and flexible to either work for 2 hours or 17 hours a day, they could not escape the troubling realities of gig platforms. Flexibility in choosing the time of the work does not obviously ensure any kinder working conditions than already present in work arrangements of informal economy. I have 3 minutes.
This time is over.
Okay, so I'll just take 1 minute to wind it up. And flexible exploitation is presented here as a relative concept insofar it is informed by work histories of gig workers who tend to juxtapose the condition of work in gig platforms with their previous occupations. And I'll skip most of it, but yeah, in essence, gig workers simply choose the meter and rhythm of their exploitation. Anna Karenina principle, which states that happy families are all alike and unhappy families are unhappy in their own ways, could be helpful metaphor for concluding the findings of this paper. Happy families were the mythical welfare states which provided stable and regular employment, while unhappy families are informal work and gig economy which are unhappy in their own ways. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I request Shuchi to make her presentation.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, everyone. With the permission of the chair and my co-panelist, and I have my teachers here as well, and my friends too. I am very thankful to be here. And my paper primarily, I apologize at the outset, could be more unsettling for many of you because I do not provide any solution-centric approach, because I myself am stuck in this conundrum that what would be the future of work and how we should deal with it. So there are certain reality bites over here, and as a lawyer I feel that it is important to come forth and bring this up in front of such multidisciplinary forum to make you understand and visible realities which are there. So to begin with, I would like to cite one of the media reports where it has just come in, I think 2 days ago, that over 6,000 postgraduates and 40,000 graduates and 1.2 lakh candidates who have studied up to 12th class have applied for a position of sweeper in Haryana. And the contractual job profile of the position is of to clean offices of government departments, boards, corporation and civic bodies. And this is nothing new which I'm sure that all of you must have been hearing it on the daily basis. But here the problem is not with the nature of work or judging the status of the work, but rather a deep-rooted problem. That is absence of work and our inability to assess the actual reason of the same. Why this example becomes imperative at this forum where we are discussing labor law and technology, I'll come to that in some time. So what I attempt to argue is in the light of evidences and empirical aspects which I've been doing throughout my research and in my legal practice as well, which are indeed not exhaustive, the impact of automation on employment and the notion of large-scale technological unemployment in India. With my limited research, I find it pretty exaggerated. And I do have reason to say that. So in the aim to counter the exaggerated narrative of technological advancement, rendering jobs redundant, and therefore massive unemployment, and the state stand that we need to dilute the protective labor legislations. I primarily want to focus on the dilution of the labor laws, and to be more clear and more specific about it, by the labor laws, I do not mean only the semi-skilled or unskilled or the labor workforce which are working. That would be applying very soon to each and every one of us. So when we talk about the dilution part, the dilution would be applying to each and every one of us, because the whole labor law scaffold has completely been changed. It has been dismantled and given a different structure altogether. So what happens, that state stand, as we see, is to dilute labor protective legislation in order to save jobs. So the whole idea, the whole narrative is that if we want to save jobs, create more jobs, let us do away with these protective legislation. There's no need to do that. And this has very, very underlying psychophancy and affinity towards the capital, narrative. Unfortunately, even our source of knowledge has been very journalistic frame of reference, wherein we are too swift to give our judgments and accept universal truth that what meets our eye is the true, wherein we do not actually delve that what is fed to us is strategic in nature or not. So in present times, what we see that one of the most widely discussed subject is steep automation, mechanization, fear of artificial intelligence engulfing human employments. But the first example I cited at the beginning of my presentation seems very unrelatable. Have these postgraduates or graduates applied for sweeper jobs due to technological advancement that has rendered their skills redundant? We really need to introspect this. So as an extension to this narrative, which is the main focus of my paper, it is often claimed that collective bargaining has to be further debilitated in present times due to the rise of automation. And with this redundancy theory of collective bargaining, resultant mechanisms like structure and most importantly regulatory and legislative structure has to be weakened, which should embolden the pro-liberal narrative. Technological disruption, as Sir has also pointed out, is hardly a new phenomena. It has happened in every era, albeit the intensity and the pace of proliferation is a significant point to be concerned about, and it is not in dispute, definitely. But the pertinent question to ask this, whether the projection of technological disruption has a cause-effect roundup, whether we have been able to take a step further and gauge that labor market disruptions and the resultant impact on employment, structural attributes, administrative angles, legal and regulatory scaffolds, are they correlated to each other? Inherently, it has been observed that in contemporary environment, where even the state wants a thriving of the free market, constantly argues that there has to be positive relationship between business profitability and public good, to the extent that they derive a significant positive correlation between growth of the capital and prosperity of the labor, which if happens is very true, but it's not happening actually. So what we see that there are waves of two unsettling and very confident arguments, which is often referred to by the state time and again. One, that the foremost responsibility of the state is to safeguard the interest of the business, and the second one is the hyperbole of employment protection is very mythical. I mean, we should clearly do away with it. It is irrelevant in the present world order. So the whole accusations is on the protectionist legislations, like if we have worker protective legislations, equal wages, equal pay for equal work, all seems very irrelevant in these times according to the present narratives. So what we see that the whole academic and practicing utopia has been created through the sizable literature which is coming. I mean, there are literature which is also cited in my paper. Due to lack of time, I won't be citing many of them, but there are multiple I don't know who funds those studies, but there are multiple studies who have these narratives and are referred to the government policy schemes and programs. One is Besley and Burgess study, which totally says that do away, koi law ki zarurat nahi hai, sort of. So this literature proposes the idea of flexibility, envisages the minimalistic regulatory enforceability and non-restrictive scaffold where the worker and the employer are into a relationship which is loosely bound by hire and fire, which I think Vageesh also very clearly said. And such arguments seem to have a very strategic placement, and many studies attempt to link the inverse relationship between protective legislations and the production part. We also see that the precariousness, not the guy standing perspective, but the precariousness in the real sense, what we actually, the dictionary meaning of precariousness and vulnerability, has been completely ignored through this study. The claim is that reform shall increase the employment percentages, have been abnormally silent on the nature of jobs produced, wage dynamics, social security coverage, as well as collective bargaining power. And here it is pertinent to note that simultaneously 38 labor legislations, which 40-50 years of precedent and common law tradition and all the legislation amendments have gone through into those 38 legislations, have been dismantled and they have been converted into 4 labor codes. And these 4 labor codes, flimsy and flaccid, I'm saying on record, to be called labor protective in nature. So if they have any capability, they are capable enough to bring the legislative catastrophe of labor and employment laws in future. Another point of contention in this narrative is, the created projection wherein in the light of disruptions, say the black swan events like COVID-19 or some part of the world is in a war, or there is economic slowdown in the global north, and topping the chart, of course, the technological disruption and AI, etc. One says that it is reasonable to expect that one lands into employment which is not fair. Fair wages, fair security, bargaining power, no need for that. One really needs to delve into root of such claims, where a sorry state of affairs is depicted in our minds, where we are more or less convinced. Yes, that is true. Majority of jobs are becoming redundant, and we have no choice to accept our fate being vulnerable workers in the market with such precarity. So whatever minuscule we are getting in our hands is enough. The feeling is very aptly expressed through this lines of the song of Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan Sahab. जितना दिया सरकार ने मुझको उतनी मेरी औकात नहीं, ये तो करम है उनका वरना मुझ में तो कोई बात नहीं. Whereas, I have been engaged into my 5 years research, which is still ongoing, and I say that we have labor cases in the courts as well. It is indeed not in dispute that technological enhancements are rendering precarity and jobs are being redundant. But what is actually happening has to be seen in a very multi-faceted format, where we have to really see different sectors. So my intervention was to get into 3 sectors, primarily the automotive sector, followed by the banking financial services, BFSI, then IT and ITS industries. So there is a lot of hullabaloo which is happening around these sectors. But the rule of parity doesn't apply to them. There is difference. Every one size fit all is not the reality. There are there are job loss happening in IT sector, but whether or automotive sector or BFSI, whether it is all happening due to the technological enhancement or because the state has become very oblivion. They are not interested in creating avenues for the workforce which is really rendering jobless. So that has to be really understood. Also, how much time, sir, I have left? Only 2 minutes. So I would really request you all to read my paper, because there are many things which I wanted to talk about. But I just want to talk about, I had a case study from the automotive sector, which is a real case study I have worked on. That is Honda motorcycle industry, which is in Tapukara, Gurgaon. I wanted to talk about that, but right now I just want to focus on the skill and the whole skilling narrative of the Indian state, and how there is this mismatch where we talk about the low or medium skilled workers and the state's idea of automation vis-a-vis protection of worker. It definitely yields a very contradictory standpoint. So on one hand, we see that labor law reforms being necessary owing to the global competitiveness demanding so, and the automation is one imperative component, thus by making regulatory framework more responsive for the economic health of the worker. But secondly, what we see when the state is also realizing that the medium and low skilled workers are at the margins in terms of technological enhancement, as we see the whole Skill India program or the whole movement, so to say, around the skilling of the country, what it has offered. Has it offered or provided a future ready solutions? The policy of the Skill India document says jobs creation for skilled youth is a major challenge before the nation. Entrepreneurship based on innovation has immense growth potential. So prima facie, at the outset, it is accepted. Job creation for skilled youth is difficult. So entrepreneurship is a way. And the significance of exploring the Skill India at this juncture is to understand the underlying aim of the narrative of skilling and upskilling the citizen, which has much ado in the country, and which actually has no association with the skill gap speculation of employability, which we are envisaging in the changing technological milieu. So the tall claims, just 1 minute and I'll wrap up. The tall claims of state doing exceptionally well in identifying skill gaps and in terms of catering to same actually condenses into a very allegorical proposal that encapsulates the programs such as beauty and wellness, food packaging, and auto component assemblage, etc., which has already reached to the saturation in the job market. So the parabolic claim of thriving entrepreneurship culture and encourage the same in the present times through skilling is not a convincing proposition. Rather, the large population who live under the shadows of speculating de-skilling under the garb of self-employment, the state also accepts as well as consents the atypical and informal forms of employment. So just to round up, I cannot go into detail of that, but the laws except there is atypical and informal forms of employment. That means if you do not have job, if you are a platform worker, if you are an on-call worker, there is an acceptance from the state, or the state has consented that we cannot do much about it. This is fine. At the max we can bring in some sort of protective coverage, which is actually practically not even seen. If you talk to your the platform worker or the Uber driver or anybody for that matter, the worker protectionist legislation is completely missing, which is claimed through these different codes. So here, to just wrap up, it is very important to see that we should not have a blanket approach to everything, that okay, technological advancement, rise of AI or chat GPT. Just to end with a very anecdotal reference, one of my friends who teaches in a law school says that we are not needed anymore because बच्चे तो chat GPT से ही पढ़ लेते हैं. So this whole feeling, I think, is not coming out of the very out of nowhere. It is very strategic, that why we who have such a training, who have had rigorous years of our PhDs and everything are bound to feel that we are no more required. So that has to be rebutted and vigorously challenged by the academic world and the practitioners as well. With this I end. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thanks.
Thanks, Shuchi. I think we have a discussion, right? Nitish?
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's good to see some friends and common faces that I usually see. First of all, thank you so much, Shuchi, Vageesh, and Professor Anirban. The things I do on the ground, I'm finally seeing on the paper. So it's very good in reflecting that what I do with Amazon Warehouse workers and gig workers on the ground, it's finally coming on the academy, on the paper. So as we conclude this stimulating discussion on the intersection of labor, law, and technology, it's clear that the rapid advancements in technology are reshaping not just the nature of work, but also the very frameworks within which labor operates, right? So I'll start with Professor Anirban. So as Professor Anirban have provided a broader historical context showing us that while digital transformation is indeed disruptive, it also carries forward patterns of continuity, particularly in the marginalization and exclusion of certain labor segments. The analysis of digital capitalism and the data-driven economy urges us to consider the implications of data as a central economic resource. It is clear that as data becomes the new oil, the control over and rights to data will increasingly define labor relations in the digital age. Coming to Vageesh, as he explores ethnographic exploration of platform labor, brings to light the lived realities of workers navigating the gig economy. His concept of the flexibility of exploitation challenges us to rethink the celebrated notion of flexibility in labor markets. The precarious conditions of platform workers, as highlighted in his research, reflect a broader trend of informalization and marginalization that technology often exacerbates rather than alleviates, right? This is a critical reminder that technological progress must be accompanied by robust legal frameworks that protect the most vulnerable. And I face the same on the ground as well. And Shuchi's presentation vividly illustrated how automation is not merely a technical shift, but a profound transformation that challenges the skills and bargaining power of workers, which I face literally the same on the ground. The questions she raises about the future of work in a post-automation world are not just academic. They are urgent and demand our immediate attention. The potential for skill redundancy and the evolving role of collective bargaining underscore the need for proactive strategies in both education and labor organization. So, in the reflecting of these presentations together, we see a common thread. Technology, while offering unprecedented opportunities, also presents significant challenges to labor that cannot be overlooked. Whether it's the automation of jobs, the precariousness of platform work, or the datification of the economy, each of these development calls for a revolution of our legal and policy frameworks. We must ask ourselves, how can we harness technological advancements to create a more equitable and inclusive labor market? How can laws evolve to protect workers in the new digital landscape? And as we move forward, the collaboration between policymakers, labor organizations, and technologists will be crucial. It's not enough to adapt to change. We must actively shape it to ensure that technology serves the many, not just the few. Thank you so much for our panelists for their insightful contributions, and to the audience for your engaged participation that I'll look forward to it right now. Let's continue this important conversation as we move forward and navigate the future of labor in an increasingly digital world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have, 10 more minutes? How much time do we have?
About 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay, so then I think we'll go straight to questions. This side, let's start, yeah, please. Short questions, so a short answer. We have only 10 minutes.
Right. So my question is to Shuchi ma'am as well as Vageesh. I'll begin with Shuchi ma'am's paper. So I liked how you spoke about. My question is that. So my question is that while we talk about unemployment and gig economy, how I am seeing it is that it's also the way the state has sort of, so gig economy then becomes like a buffer between state and labor, where the state then is able to also redirect and almost brush off the responsibility of ensuring social justice and well-being for its citizens. The reason I'm asking this is also how there was a recent report that was released on unemployed youth in Haryana have actually joined cow vigilante groups and are seeing that as a government job. So how do we see unemployment, gig economy, and of course the rise of the right? Since I work with this, I was interested in asking you
just
about
make
that.
It very short.
Yeah, again, the second question is extremely short. With regards to precarity, Vageesh, I would like you to focus on also how often Indians or most of the gig workers that I spoke to while just riding on the bike or something, they often say that we like working here. Despite their precarious conditions, they would say मेहनत की कमाई और भगवान का जो दिया है उसी से खुश हैं. Is it, as John sir had raised a question about subverting the anger, is it about that, or is it also something deeply repressed in the Indian psyche, how we see fatalism, right? Like, so those two questions.
Okay. Next, please. Yeah. Okay.
My first question, they are related, but one with Vageesh. This shift, you know, the example you gave of someone who was working at, and three, it's also a job where labor capital relation does not occur in any routine manner. You just log on to a portal, log in this many hours. So you have from skilled to unskilled, I think is the most important, because that is what links us to Shuchi's, if I may take just 30 seconds on this, that really what we mean by skill remains unsaid. So, so that I think is very problematic, considering Professor Dasgupta's statement also that what we mean by appropriate technology then is not addressed. And of course, underlying this, if I just half a second, is my husband works at IIT, and the design book on machinery starts with a definition of good machinery as one where skill is and intelligence are the least required. So we are working towards a dumbing of the population, which I'd like you to respond to.
Yeah, okay. Okay, first you, go ahead. But short and quick.
Very short. Taking from what Sanjana said, but presenting it a little differently. Can one see this to be a crisis of neoliberal state? Yes, but entrepreneurship, self-entrepreneurship, owner entrepreneurship, and then the idea of Atmanirbhar, and then the state receding back into not making available as many government jobs, and then the gig work. So isn't this like and then the right wing takes over by counter-anti, thinking this is really the government job, and then the question of dignity and respect. So there's a lot working here, and do you think that there's a way in which this debate needs to bring the state back in, and this decoupling of technology with society? Because every time we say technology, at least with labor work, one hears, where is the state? Because state should be there, but it's not. So that's the kind of question.
Yes.
My name is Vageesh Vishnoi, and I'm a PhD candidate at Center for Political Studies. And I'm sorry I get very anxious when I'm told to ask quick questions, but I'll try my level best. So my question is to Dr. Shuchi, and my question relates to collective bargaining and automation. So just to so I'm talking about labor market exploitation, the conceptualized by Dr. Sumit Maskar. So an historical anecdote is that in Maharashtra, when the textile industry was very affluent, so Marathas used to have this access, and the Mahars of Maharashtra also used to have access. But then it happened that when in textile industry you need to take the thread into your mouth and then you have to weave all these things. So there was this concept of, not concept, but there was untouchability, and Marathas were the one who said that you are not going to work with the Mahar workers, right? So in that context, it's not the capitalist who is exploiting the worker, but the worker itself exploiting the worker, right? So Dr. B.R. Ambedkar also said that Brahmanism and capitalism is in Indian society is like that. So I would like to know about collecting bargaining in that sense, and does your ethnographic study on automation on Honda motorcycle industry brings out these nuances as well? Thank you.
Yes, I think we have no. Thank you. Very quickly, Shuchi, the Rajasthan government, it is told, had initiated legislation. What is the character of that? And there is also discourse about it. Professor Dasgupta, in terms of these multidimensional issues you have presented, the question is labor and employment, is it a variable in itself, or how does it work with related challenges? I would like to bring the question of dialectic of labor and leisure, which has been part of the emancipatory discourse of modernity. It is in this context, how do we relate? Oh, there is certainly the reduction of labor, but what kind of new possibilities can be initiated along with the discourse of basic minimum wage? Can we also think about a basic minimum labor time? So a new kind of thinking about well-being and the common good. And very quickly, Vageesh, now this ethnography of precarity, again, precarity as a theme. Now, is it just reproducing the notion of precarity, or how in people's life precarity interacts with certain notion of flourishing? Therefore, those people who are offering themselves to self-exploitation, what is the ecology of relationship that inspires somebody to free oneself from self-exploitation and have much more mutual care? Okay. Okay, yes.
Thank you for the presentations and very needed topic. In fact, and I'm glad to see such great minds working on it. Vageesh, my question is to you about flexible exploitation. What is the role of leisure? What is the trade that one does with leisure, labor as a labor, to allow for this exploitation? That is the primary question. And to Shuchi about the state, lack of state intervention, right? Is that because partly because the state feels, or feels that it should not protect, or it doesn't want to imply to the international market that it's a protectionist state for gig economy to develop, which has been criticized, and we've moved away from protectionist state. So yeah, I mean, like that's where I would. What is the nature of state care in this? Is it neglectful or whatever, or state neglect rather? Thank you.
Three questions for three speakers. Dr. Anirban, I wanted to know if degrowth is as taboo as the C word in mainstream economics. And the second was that there seems to be a conundrum that for a welfare state, to maintain a welfare state at India's level, you need capital. For capital, you need, since we prefer the private capital way, you need low taxes. Otherwise, the capital will move out, and then you will have less money for welfare. So this seems to be a structural problem. How do we go about it? Or is it possible that we just increase taxation and that will work? To Vageesh, I just wanted to know, related questions have been asked, that did the workers have, in your ethnography, that any sense of, did they change jobs only for monetary gain, or did they have a sense that, no, we are alright changing jobs for monetary gains, even if it means a low status job, was something like that. And to Dr. Shuchi, I just wanted to know that there seems to be a counter movement going on about this David Harvey's bullshit jobs and stuff, like why need labor, abolition of labor in a more positive sense. And we seem to be saying, no, we need work. So how do you see that? And just one thing that I wanted to ask, on Bengal and Kerala and Bihar seem to be sort of empty sort of states that where no jobs, where labor laws are strong, not in Bihar, sorry, in Kerala, but there seems to be no jobs for youth. Thank you.
Okay, I think.
One very brief. It's not pertinent to any one speaker. I mean, I just listened to all of them and I realized that capitalist economy not only survives, but it has also been reinforced and legitimized itself precisely because of this binary that we're caught up, that vulnerability and precarity is either a cause or an effect. I think it's a mutually reinforcing force. And therefore, capitalism would perish the day you stop alienating labor. And we all understand alienation of labor has been legitimized not because capitalism has been imposed. The labor do not have a choice, so they support capitalism. The entire gig workers and footloose workers, despite the fact they're contented or satisfied or free, unfree. I mean, the primary question is that the state has become their rescuer, and by rescuing them, it has built over a period of time a dependency syndrome. And so it's a very complex and problematized issue. We need to politicize and contest it at the same time. That's very important.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, Professor Arun Kumar ji, the way we are talking of unemployment problem, labor problem, and the way we are already saying about AI and automation will create much more problem, and we have already a policy of Government of India to have agreement, that's a contractual for 4 years, and they may not be getting all benefits earlier they were getting. Can we think of this type of model in other services also, so that equally opportunity is given to other people also? Because our economy is growing in such a way, there is a disparity, huge disharmony is growing in the whole society. Why not to think of really a so-called socialism which can help everybody instead of capitalism which is failing a lot? Thank you.
Hi. Time for answer also. A short question for Vageesh. It might be slightly reflecting, but I wanted to know as we see that algorithms are kind of dictating the daily lives of the gig workers, how much understanding or what is their perception and adaptation towards it? Like, according to your engagement.
Okay.
Yes, right. I just wanted to know from Vageesh, given his articulation of precariat as abrupt discontinuity of past, how do you place algorithmic feedback and consumer choice in this matrix? And the second question is for Shuchi, that there are recently reports that a single entity servicing Zomato had multiple registrations. In that kind of a scenario, where is ownership and where is certainty of contract in the first place, which is a more real-world problem to solve rather than a digital problem of exploitation. So how do you, sort of reconcile these aspects?
Good afternoon everyone, myself Ayushi. I am second year history honors student from University of Delhi. So this is a very generalized question onto this topic, and my question is to Dasgupta sir. So the question is that in today's era of liberalization, even job sector is being liberalized through outsourcing and assembly line production. So, but if we look into the recent case of population from South India, that the population was being deceived and were being enrolled into the Russian army to work into the Russian-Ukraine war. And now the Indian government is working to bring them back into India. So how can government introduce labor laws to put constraint and restraint into this issue? So this is my question. Thank you.
Just a very concrete, at the same time abstract question. I want to know, because it has become very clear that there is a weakening of labor compared to capital. So how are we valuing labor now? We are almost close to a socialist dream. Somebody was telling me about abolition of labor. It was not abolition of labor, it's of wage labor. So in terms of wage, the value of labor, I want to understand how it is working now, given the kind of transformation that we are undergoing in terms of relations between capital and labor.
Okay. Any more questions? I think now we can have 1 minute each for answering.
Well, yeah. Yes. Okay, I'll obviously choose the questions that I can answer. Well, degrowth is talked about more often in economics, maybe not mainstream economics, but it's, yeah, I mean, there are situations where the limits to growth is taken more seriously, and in that context, degrowth is talked about. Now, the governments, I mean, this is a loop, right? That you cannot tax capital more because otherwise they'll leave, therefore we have less for labor anyway and welfare. I think it's a loop which looks reasonable, but I think you just need to look at an old-fashioned study of how the government budgets are outlaid to understand this is not a question of lack of resources. It's a question of keeping welfare low, also to keep the bargaining power of labor low. So it's not a simple question of not having resources. Okay, alienation of labor. I'll only say one thing which I find very useful to think about labor in capitalism, including what you were asking, that there was this British economist, John Robinson, who once said that the only thing worse than being exploited in capitalism is not being exploited, which is actually an important point to realize, that this question of this is exploitative, we could have made it better, yes, of course, but I think the question of necessity, that this is, and it's associated with what Professor Giri was saying. This idea, you can actually, I think there is a lot of scope to re-envision or rethink the concept of leisure itself, because I think there are newer meanings of leisure that one can see if you talk to a gig worker seriously. I remember reading somewhere, somebody said that, no, it works very well, you know, there's this woman I like to hang out with, and I can keep going back to her in between now, this is, and there's nothing, I mean, I don't think this is false consciousness. I don't think we should treat it that way. But it's a newer understanding of what this material sort of reality is giving me. I mean, how can I make sense of it in a slightly more bearable, make it more bearable? And I think there's a lot there. That's all I can say at this moment. I think I'll just, leave it at that.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I'll leave out a lot of questions because of 1 minute limitation. So I'll start with the question of fatalism. So, in the ethnographic narratives that I came across, this idea that what else can we do, this is very much informed by their past, where they are coming from, because you must know that in other previous occupation, it's not just the wages which were low wages which were the rule rather than exception, but also there is certain cultural aspects related to their previous work, and which pertain to workplace abuse and how the bosses and other workers behave with them. So that is something which informs their relationship with their current work. So I think that is the question which talks to this idea of relative precarity that Andrew Sanchez talks about in context of Tata workers who were erstwhile permanent, but then they have been given the contractual status in recent while with onset of neoliberalization. So you may look this aspect of relative precarity. And then there was this comment on skilled labor and unskilled labor. Then I don't think that there is a certain dichotomy operating there, because the skill to ride a bike across the city and look at the map constantly is also a skill in itself, but the difference lies in the fact that this kind of skill is not learned in some skill development programs of government or any other factory shop floor. these are the skills which are learned in daily practice of life. So because of this generic nature, capital is able to onboard as many as workers as it might want to have. So that is something I wanted to talk about on skill. Then there was this mischievous question about the trade between labor and leisure. So in particularly younger group, those who were in schools, I would ask them that what pushed them to start working for a platform. So of course there were narratives where these students did not have any other choice than to leave out their not only education but also leisure hours. But then there were also narratives who are in the gig work because they see it as easy money. They would say कि पापा से पैसा मांगना अच्छा नहीं लगता. That's why we are here. So and we were not doing anything before. We would just play cricket and other stuff. That's why we thought it's better to have some income rather than have nothing. So you see, there is certain trading of leisure and labor, and this has two dimensions. One is where workers are actually forced into it, and others who have seemingly voluntarily entered into it. And then there was this question on the workers' perception on the algorithm. So after I had completed my ethnography with Zomato and worked for it, I knew at least 3 ways to cancel the order and not get penalized for it, owing to the knowledge that workers shared with me and how do they go about it. I saw it as their own ways of resisting the dictates of platform. And so what I would say here, we think of algorithm as something iron cage which cannot be broken. But then if you would understand the narratives of the workers and how do they do it, then you would know even algorithm could be molded and resisted if maybe in individualized way. And that is a kind of resistance which is there in liminal form, and that is not the resistance of industrial workers who would resist by just simply putting their hands in the pocket and not producing anything. But here the resistance is more individualized because labor process itself is very individualized. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Shuchi.
Yeah. Most of the questions I do not remember. I'm sorry for that. I'll stick to some of the pertinent ones which I'm even comfortable to answer rather. So to begin with Ziri sir's and Avichal's question, I'm clubbing them together. And very pertinent question about the labor laws in Rajasthan. So my case study about HMSI workers and the labor law in Pakistan, I am saying Rajasthan, is because I have done some work in Pakistan as well back in 2010. So that is why, and on labor. So anyway, that is why it is important that Rajasthan boasts of being one of the topmost investor-friendly states. And with the narrative, when we the state is proposing the narrative that if we have flexible labor laws, it is very good for the worker as well, and it is very good for the employer as well. Then why approximately, I don't know how many of you know, approximately 3,000 workers were retrenched. And if you do a Google search, you will find out that 3,000 overnight the workers were retrenched on account of being having gotten into criminal conspiracy. But the story was different. There could be anecdotal evidences to that. But the reality, which from my own research I found out, that very recently Rajasthan had changed its whole, because it falls in the concurrent labor. It changed its all labor protective legislations. To name few, the Industrial Dispute Rajasthan Act, which came in the year 2014, wherein the hire and fire was eased. Then there was a changes in Contract Labor Regulation and Abolition Act 1970. Then there was, if you go to Rajasthan, you would figure out that the self-certification, third-party certification, online inspections of the factory, they are very much liberal. So if you are an industrialist in Rajasthan, it is really easy to do business and hire and fire your worker at your own whims and fancies. With no offense to anyone who's hailing from Rajasthan. And second question about the collective bargaining part and labor being exploitative of labor. In my research, I did not find such instance. I have found that there has been a very close-knit group of the workers. There were leaders, trade union leaders, which were really propelling the whole movement. But after some time, it's all about roti, kapda, makan, and you have to, it fizzles out. That is the unfortunate situation when we have a sustenance issue. So that was there, but some of them actually emerged as labor, and some of them also did a law degree, which I am still in touch with. So they are actually representing their brothers and sisters in the court of law. So that is something which is very optimistic. Another question was, this I think would be the last question I would take, of Sanjana, the buffer of talking about the gig work. So this very clearly shows the gig work or the informal work, casual work, etc. has got consent of the state, not only nationally but even internationally. If you see the ILO documents recently, the ILO is coming with multiple reports and multiple guidelines as to how to enhance the gig work to make it work even better. So there is acceptance, and there is no problem which is seen even at the international level. There is no problem of precarity, there is no problem of lack of collective bargaining, social security, or anything, wages for that matter, as ma'am pointed out. So wages for that matter, it has not been problematized. So whatever money you are getting, even if it is very exploitative amount, and that is also kind of reflected in our labor code on wages, is same. So that is what I had to say. Maybe as sir has to do the final round.
Well, there's no time left for doing any final round, but nonetheless, what I'll do is just raise a few points. I think we've been talking about the micro. What my argument on employment has been that actually the issue is coming from the macro. The macro being that capital has become highly mobile globally. Labor is not mobile, and therefore capital is able to extract concessions from the nation state. And not only from the nation state, but within states also, it makes states compete with each other to give concessions. So say in Gujarat, I'll give this concession, then I'll go not to Maharashtra, but I'll not go to Maharashtra, but I'll go to Andhra. So I think we need to actually weave that in. And it is in this context that I remember World Bank saying that we need market-friendly state intervention. So it's not a complete retreat of the state. So it's not as if the market is left free. Market must be supported by the state. So that brings in the political economy of the current times, where in a sense, the opposition ruled states like Karnataka and like Telangana, they have gone in for 12-hour work week, which was part of the labor code. That which is what Narayan Murthy is saying, 70-hour work week, should be there. The idea is to exploit labor because labor has no choice. Labor will have to do the work that's required. So I think this idea that it's coming from the international, coming to the national and the regional and the state levels, that linkage I think needs to be very carefully looked at in all this. Other thing is that we very often say projections. That there were Luddites, things didn't change. There were computerization, but still unemployment didn't change. But I think there's no linear process. It's a non-linear process, and I'm reminded of Kurzweil's book on singularity is near. He's pointing out that how the rate of change is becoming exponential. And not only is it becoming exponential, the exponent is also changing exponentially. So now in his second book, this was a 2005 book, saying singularity is near. Now he says we are in the singularity. That means the rate of change has already become exponential, where the exponent is changing exponentially with the chat GPT, etc. And very startling conclusions he comes to about the nature of production, the nature of relationships that would exist. So I think we have to look at the political economy very carefully. And it's in this context the idea of what is truth and what are facts. Facts can be manufactured by the state. So the state manufactures the truth. And that's what I think we are all contending with, where the narrative is being given to us. So I won't elaborate more on that, but one final thing, linked with education. I think skilling, education, the ACER reports that have been coming out showing that 14 to 18 children cannot read, 40% of them cannot do second class reading, writing and maths. So what kind of skilling is possible? And within this, what is a skill? The question that was raised. Farmers have a skill, but they're losing their farming. Okay, so it's not that they didn't have skill, but they are now going to become labor in the urban market, in construction, taking bricks and so on up. So now they're becoming unskilled, because what skill they had, we don't call it a skill, or the labor market doesn't support it, and therefore they're now becoming unskilled. So the nature of education and the kind of thing, and then the wages issue. The Constitution promises a living wage, not just a minimum wage. So we haven't even got to minimum wage. What to talk of living wage? So this is another issue which weakens labor, and therefore labor has to take whatever it gets. So the kind of work that is there. So thank you very much.